Here's the uncomfortable truth. The real villains aren't the screamers. They're the ones who smile while betraying you. There is a certain breed of reality television persona that can sit squarely at the epicenter of chaos while blinking serenely as if reciting a lullaby d'été. And then there is Rachel, whose performance at the Season 10 reunion refined that archetype into something approaching avant-garde absurdity. While the cast hurled receipts, revelations, and the remains of whatever trust once existed, Rachel floated through it all with the emotional presence of a slightly confused mannequin. The tear ducts refused to so much as twitch. The face hovered in an eerie half-smile. And every accusation, each one damning, detailed, and delivered with gusto, seemed to land on her with the muted thud of a decorative throw pillow. The reunion wasn't a trial. It was a gallery exhibition titled Portrait of a Blank Affect. And Rachel, to her undeniable credit, committed so fully to the bit that the entire cast and audience began searching for the nearest DSM criteria to cling to. Naturally, theories bloomed. Medication, sedation, dissociation, delusion. They all enjoyed their moment in the sun. A few viewers even suggested she might be contending with something pharmacological, observing that her glassy demeanor bore a passing resemblance to those Bravo reunion regulars who had arrived fortified with what one might charitably call pharmaceutical courage. Indeed, the Xanax bottle that made a cameo courtesy of a fumbling co-star became, for some, the Chekhov's gun of the entire affair. If it appears in Act 1, someone is swallowing it by Act 3. But speculating about pills is almost generous. After all, attributing her behavior to medication suggests there was a healthier baseline somewhere beneath it. An optimism the season's events did not exactly nurture. Far more unsettling than the possible tranquilizers was the unmistakable sense that the revelations crashing down around her held roughly the emotional weight of a lukewarm elevator conversation. What seemed to bother her wasn't the betrayal itself, but the inconvenience of having to acknowledge it publicly. The only time tears materialized was in the extra footage segment, when the narrative required her to display the kind of performative remorse expected of someone whose extracurricular activities included sleeping with a friend's partner during a family funeral. That she appeared more distressed about looking like the sort of person who would do such a thing than about actually doing it was, frankly, a masterful piece of unintentional self-characterization. One of the great long-standing myths surrounding Rachel is that she is harmless, perhaps even sweet. Anyone who believed that before this season is now clutching the metaphorical shattered vase of their own shattered judgment. Underneath the wide-eyed Bambi expression lies a talent for manipulation that demands respect, if not admiration. The devastating efficiency with which she embedded herself into Ariana's life, sharing confidences, borrowing trust, and smiling gently all the while, would have been impressive if it weren't also so grotesque. The emotional equivalent of a Trojan horse, she rolled through Ariana's front door under the banner of friendship, only to unsheath betrayal from inside the walls. Her conversation with Ariana about intimacy remains an almost clinically perfect example of sinister choreography masquerading as concern. It was a performance so startling in its coldness, so brazen in its duplicity, that it could comfortably sit on a syllabus somewhere under case studies in calculated treachery. Asking someone about the intimate state of their relationship while actively sleeping with their partner is not merely inappropriate. It is almost artful in its audacity. And then, of course, there was the now infamous throuple joke. Delivered with a giggle, it possessed the tone of someone who had forgotten that her private fantasies were not meant to be spoken aloud. Not since the invention of the love triangle has someone shown such an earnest commitment to geometric chaos. Yet, for all her feigned naivete, Rachel demonstrated an uncanny ability to navigate the group with comfort and confidence during the affair. The shaking voice, the timid shrinking from confrontation, the performance of perpetual fragility, all evaporated whenever deceit served her. While she had spent earlier seasons trembling through conflict, she spent this one lounging comfortably in the casual boldness of someone who considered duplicity a natural extension of daily conversation. This transformation was so dramatic that some viewers reasonably concluded the affair must have been underway far longer than the timeline admitted. Her sudden poise was not the blossom of personal growth. It was the smug glow of a woman who believed she possessed a starring role in a romantic subplot that would swiftly become the main plotline. Perhaps the most tragicomic element of this saga was Rachel's steadfast belief that her clandestine relationship was the love story of the century. She seemed to imagine that the aftershocks of her betrayal would eventually settle into a picturesque tableau, she and her chosen partner center stage, basking in the triumphant glow of forbidden passion vindicated. Instead, she received a crash course in the brutal arithmetic of reality television romance. The man who cheats with you will not hesitate to cheat on you, and the fantasy you've crafted in your mind tends to disintegrate the moment it touches oxygen. When confronted with the revelation that Ariana and Tom were still intimate during the affair, her expression cracked with genuine shock. The lone moment where she appeared to register the gravity of her choices. It was as if the entire house of cards she had so carefully ignored finally collapsed in front of her. Suddenly, the grand romance she believed she was starring in revealed itself for what it truly was. A tired rerun in which she was merely the latest interchangeable supporting character destined to be written off after sweeps week. And yet, even in that moment, the emotional depth was minimal. Surprise? Yes. Devastation? Barely. Accountability? Not a trace. It was the emotional equivalent of watching someone discover that their favorite smoothie shop was out of mango puree. One cannot accuse Rachel of inconsistency, whether ignoring warnings, overlooking consequences, or sidestepping responsibility. She has shown remarkable dedication to her personal ethos, doing whatever she wants, whenever she wants, with absolute disregard for anyone standing in her line of sight. It is almost endearing in its predictability, if endearing were still a word legally permitted near her name. Viewers have attempted to place her somewhere on the moral spectrum: sociopath, narcissist, pawn, naif, fool, or mastermind. The truth likely lies closer to the duller center. A person of limited emotional bandwidth, limited foresight, and unlimited willingness to indulge selfish impulses whenever they appear dressed as opportunity. There is no need for a clinical label. There is something far simpler and far more accurate. She behaves this way because she can. No calculation required, no diagnosis necessary, just a breathtaking lack of empathy paired with a childlike certainty that consequences are optional. If reality television is a machine designed to expose character, then Rachel achieved what few cast members ever have. She revealed herself completely, without subtlety, without complexity, and without remorse. She became not the villain by editing, but the villain by execution, not by narrative construction, but by self-inflicted implosion, not by accident, but by insistence. Her performance at the reunion did not redeem or reframe anything. It merely confirmed what the entire season had been screaming. Beneath the soft-spoken exterior and vacant smile lies someone capable of the kind of betrayal that is not impulsive, not misunderstood, but deliberate. And the only tragedy she recognized was that the plot didn't go the way she'd imagined. Some public figures cultivate mystique. Rachel cultivates frailty, the trembling voice, the doe-eyed bafflement, the soft-spoken confusion. Each element forms a carefully assembled persona designed to suggest she is far too delicate to engage in anything resembling malice. It is a remarkable strategy. By projecting the emotional range of a fainting Victorian heiress, she effectively lowers the world's expectations to the floor. And then, when she inevitably behaves abominably, the bar is already so low it doubles as a tripping hazard. This artifice of fragility worked for years. It allowed her to float through conflicts like a feather that insisted it was a brick. She earned sympathy by default, despite offering little evidence that she possessed the self-awareness typically required to deserve it. But Season 10 swept away that facade with the ruthless efficiency of a well-timed plot twist. Suddenly, the trembling ingenue revealed the steel traps hidden beneath the lace. What had once seemed like insecurity now read as strategic opacity. What had seemed like confusion now resembled calculated indifference. And what had once passed for innocence now unveiled itself as something far less flattering. a refusal to take responsibility wrapped in the aesthetic of helplessness. Few individuals have demonstrated such a remarkable ability to forget details that prove inconvenient. When confronted with the timeline of the affair, Rachel's memory evaporated with impressive speed, leaving behind only a collection of half-formed explanations that dissolved upon contact with logic. Meanwhile, her memory for compliments, flirtations, and ego-stroking monologues remained pristine. Her recollection of her own victimhood thrived. Her grasp on empathy, already tenuous, slipped entirely whenever accountability entered the room. Throughout the season, she displayed the uncanny talent of absorbing kindness while deflecting criticism with the skill of a seasoned politician. Every pointed question was met with either a dazed blink or a wandering justification that attempted to transform catastrophic behavior into something resembling personal growth. The result was a narrative in which she cast herself as the misunderstood wanderer, an explorer of emotional landscapes who simply stumbled into a forbidden romance as though it were an unmarked hiking trail. In this mythologized version of events, the destruction she caused became an unfortunate side effect, rather than a direct result of her choices. But no amount of strategic amnesia can disguise the truth. She walked into the lives of others with full knowledge of the damage she would cause, and did so anyway, comforted by the assumption that her gentle demeanor would soften the blow. One of the more astonishing aspects of Rachel's behavior was her insistence on speaking the language of friendship, while treating the concept itself as an optional accessory. She adopted the role of confidant with an enthusiasm that bordered on athletic, stepping into Ariana's emotional space with the eagerness of someone auditioning for a role they had already been promised. She listened to Ariana's vulnerabilities with an attentiveness that would have been admirable if the entire exercise had not been overshadowed by her ongoing affair with Ariana's partner. The juxtaposition was grotesque, a compassionate facade wrapped around an unthinkable betrayal. It was emotional ventriloquism. The words and gestures may have resembled support, but the intent behind them was hollow. The bizarre duality of comforting a friend while simultaneously dismantling her life in secret would have been shocking if Rachel had shown even a flicker of recognition that she was behaving monstrously. Instead, she maintained an air of placid detachment, as though friendship were merely a storyline she was contractually obligated to maintain. This hollow version of companionship, stripped of loyalty and sincerity, illuminated her capacity for self-serving behavior far more effectively than any extended confession could. If friendships are built on shared trust and mutual care, then Rachel treated those qualities as set pieces, props to be arranged and discarded depending on the scene. One might generously suggest that Rachel struggles with boundaries, but struggles implies effort, and effort was conspicuously absent. What she demonstrated was a consistent preference for treating boundaries as more of a suggestion than a rule. Whether slipping into a romantic relationship with someone else's partner, inserting herself into private relational conflicts, or allowing affection to blur into entitlement, she displayed the kind of selective permissiveness that would make even a novice therapist clutch their clipboard in despair. Her explanation, when she offered one, hinged on a vague narrative of emotional searching, as though her actions represented some existential quest for connection, rather than a plainly selfish choice. This framing, of course, conveniently erased the agency of everyone she harmed. The discomfort, betrayal, and emotional fallout of others became footnotes in the sweeping story she believed she was living. The truth was far simpler. She ignored boundaries because honoring them would have required self-restraint. And self-restraint never stood a chance in a season where she viewed every interaction as an audition for a role she was determined to claim. What made Rachel's arc so riveting and so exasperating was not the affair itself, but her extraordinary inability to respond to its consequences with even a minimal display of emotional authenticity. In the face of confrontation, she did not plead, rage, or crumble. She simply existed, quietly, vacantly, as though the events were happening inside a glass aquarium and she was merely observing the movement of others without understanding the context. This emotional minimalism inspired interpretations that ranged from psychological speculation to armchair diagnoses. Yet no label, clinical or otherwise, captures the distinctive flatness she brought to moments that demanded moral urgency. Her calmness did not convey strength. It conveyed emptiness, an absence of remorse so profound it created its own atmosphere. Her stillness was not the stillness of contemplation, but the stillness of someone who had not yet grasped why her actions mattered. And the reunion, where castmates expressed their fury with volcanic intensity, only highlighted this hollow center. She appeared less like a participant in the conflict and more like a bystander who had wandered onto the stage by mistake. Many reality TV villains revel in their notoriety. They wield their ruthlessness with theatrical flourish. They apologize with a wink. They monologue with the gusto of someone who has fully embraced their role in the ecosystem of televised chaos. Rachel was not one of them. Her villainy lacked charisma, lacked intention, lacked the self-awareness necessary to be entertaining. It was banal, a slow-moving train wreck powered not by ambition, but by emotional negligence. She didn't seize power. She stumbled into devastation and looked surprised when someone pointed out the smoke. Even when given the opportunity to articulate remorse, she defaulted to a catalog of deflections, excuses, and softly spoken half-truths. Somehow, she managed to be both the architect of the season's greatest scandal and the least dynamic character within it. This contradiction, catastrophic impact paired with minimal personality, makes her one of the most peculiar antagonists the franchise has ever produced. Her villainy was not grand. It was not operatic. It was quiet, slack-jawed, performed with the energy of a malfunctioning Roomba, nudging repeatedly into the same corner while insisting it is navigating with intention. The season dismantled Rachel's public image in real time. Every episode chipped away at the persona she had spent years curating. The harmless ingenue who floated through drama like a bubble carried by a gentle wind. By the finale, that bubble had not merely popped, it had dissolved into a sticky mess that clung to every person she had wronged. The revelation was stark. Fragility is not a shield when wielded as a weapon. The performance of vulnerability cannot protect someone from accountability when the actions beneath it are fundamentally contemptible. Yet Rachel seemed genuinely bewildered by the collapse of her image, as though expecting the world to interpret her betrayal through the same soft focus lens she applied to her own behavior. She appeared to believe that her delicate demeanor would absolve her, that empathy would override outrage, that confusion would eclipse cruelty. The disconnect between her perception and reality was not merely dramatic, it was historic. She learned far too late that a gentle voice cannot sanitize a vicious act, and wide eyes cannot mask a closed conscience. In the ruins left behind, Rachel attempted to reassemble a version of herself that still resembled the heroine of the personal narrative she had been writing in her head. Unfortunately, the audience had already read ahead, and the plot no longer belonged to her. Reality television has many flaws, but it excels at one thing: exposing the gulf between self-perception and actual behavior. In Rachel's case, that gulf widened into a canyon so vast it could have been listed as a geological landmark. Once the affair became public, she appeared to believe the worst was over. The truth had emerged, the reactions had been unleashed, and now, surely, the world would begin its slow march toward forgiveness. She seemed certain that her romance would flourish under the newfound honesty, and that the fallout, though dramatic, would resolve itself with the neatness of a scripted finale. Instead, the shockwaves intensified. Every clip, every interview, every confession added fuel to a fire she was convinced had already burned out. What she mistook for closure was actually ignition, the point at which her actions finally met their consequences without the buffer of secrecy. It was here, in the cold daylight of exposure, that the most unnerving truth emerged. Not that she lacked remorse, but that she seemed genuinely perplexed by the expectation of it. At the heart of Rachel's unraveling was her unwavering belief in a grand romance that existed only in her imagination. She held on to it with the earnestness of someone clutching a balloon labeled forever, oblivious to the fact that it was already deflating. Her chosen partner, long practiced in the art of emotional escapism, had whispered the kind of promises that sound poetic at 2 a.m. and pathetic by morning. He gave her borrowed dreams, simplistic assurances, hollow declarations, and a melodramatic vision of a future in which their love would somehow transcend ethics, logistics, and the minor inconvenience of having detonated a long-term relationship. Rachel embraced these fantasies with startling sincerity. She seemed to believe she was living a love epic rather than participating in an act of relational vandalism. Her certainty that this story would culminate in happiness revealed a breathtaking lack of understanding about the man she had aligned herself with. The shock that washed over her when she learned he was still intimate with Ariana was not simply heartbreak, it was revelation. For the first time, she glimpsed the truth the audience had seen all along. She was not the star of his narrative, merely a storyline of convenience. The fairy tale she'd constructed collapsed, not with drama, but with a dull, embarrassing thud. She looked stunned only because she had never imagined she might be disposable. Throughout the scandal, Rachel displayed a remarkable resistance to engaging with her own wrongdoing. She apologized in shape rather than substance, words arranged in sentences that resembled contrition without containing any. Her explanations meandered through the familiar terrain of self-reflection light. Phrases about not being in a good place, references to emotional confusion, vague gestures toward personal struggles. All of it formed a fog dense enough to obscure the simple truth she refused to articulate. She made deliberate choices that caused deliberate harm, and the fallout was not a misunderstanding, but a direct consequence of her actions. Her version of accountability was an elaborate performance with no emotional investment. Every apology functioned like a grant application for sympathy, clinical, rehearsed, stripped of sincerity. She seemed unaware that remorse requires more than acknowledging that others feel hurt. It requires acknowledging that one is responsible for causing that hurt. Even when confronted directly, her responses hovered somewhere between bafflement and mild inconvenience. She appeared less distressed by moral implications and more irritated that her personal journey had been interrupted by people insisting that what she did actually mattered. This refusal to engage with the consequences of her actions revealed what the entire season had hinted at. Emotional detachment was not her shield, but her default setting. There is a certain grandeur to a well-crafted reality television villain, a sense of theatrical purpose and unapologetic ambition. They often relish their notoriety, using it as currency in the grand economy of televised drama. They know exactly what they are doing, why they are doing it, and how it will play. Rachel lacked all of that. Her villainy contained no artistry, no strategy, no self-awareness. It happened to everyone else while happening around her. She stumbled into disaster and then stared blankly as people tried to explain what the disaster was. The most damning aspect of her arc was not the betrayal itself, but her utter failure to convert it into something narratively coherent. Instead of leaning into redemption or darkness or self-discovery, she drifted somewhere between oblivious and apathetic, offering little insight and even less emotion. In the world of reality television, where being compelling is often more important than being correct, she achieved a rare feat. She managed to be both catastrophically wrong and chronically uninteresting. The chaos she caused was riveting. The person at the center of it was a void. Rachel's greatest miscalculation was believing that the public identity she had been cultivating for years, soft-spoken, sweet-natured, endlessly misunderstood, could survive contact with the truth. She assumed that her tone could overshadow her actions, that her facial expressions could soften the blunt edges of betrayal, that the world would see her missteps as endearing rather than alarming. The illusion shattered instantly. The season exposed not only the limits of her persona, but the limits of her emotional depth. Without the protective layer of carefully curated fragility, what remained was a portrait of someone startlingly underdeveloped. A person whose moral instincts never evolved past self-interest, who interpreted affection as entitlement, and who mistook attention for validation. This hollowness was not tragic. It was deliberate. It was built through years of avoiding introspection, evading accountability, and gliding through conflicts without ever learning from them. When the time came to confront the consequences of her choices, she had no tools, no insight, and no narrative to offer. Her persona did not fail her. She failed it. The final truth of Rachel's journey is that she will be remembered not for her presence, but for her absence. An absence of awareness, of empathy, of sincerity, of growth. Her story is one of negative space. The things she did not understand, did not feel, did not grasp, did not take responsibility for. And yet, paradoxically, she left a mark precisely because of this emptiness. By refusing to inhabit her own narrative, she inadvertently allowed everyone else to define her. She became a symbol of the kind of emotional vacancy that wreaks havoc simply because it cannot comprehend anything outside itself. In the end, the scandal did not destroy her reputation, it revealed it. The reunion did not condemn her, it exposed her. And the season did not transform her. It unveiled her, quietly, plainly, and without ceremony, as someone whose greatest harm was caused not by malice, but by the chilling simplicity of not caring. Her legacy is not villainy, it is vacancy. A vacancy that swallowed trust, loyalty, friendship, and truth, and blinked, confused, as if wondering why no one applauded.